Hello everyone, welcome back to Books of Genghis Khan. I'm Ben, and today I have for you a companion video to my previous one about book 2's in series that took a step up from book 1. Well, that got me thinking about all the book 2's I've read, and so here are 10 book 2's that I felt took a step down for me in terms of the quality and my enjoyment and engagement level. And I'll be very happy to hear if you disagree with any of these. That means you probably enjoyed them more than I did, and I love when people love what they're reading. So let me know if any of these you disagree about. And I think I have a few hot takes in here, along with some book 2's for some of my favorite series. So some of these I did like, they just didn't live up to maybe the book 1, and others I might have get a little ranty about. So I'll save those for towards the end. Here we go. I'll start with a book from one of my favorite series. This is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So when I read this as a kid, I liked it. I don't think I had many problems with it, but more as I got older and I reread the series more, it was the one that I was always least enthusiastic to reread, and sometimes I would just skip it as I reread through the series. And so probably the one I've read the least, but I've seen the movie a couple times, so I'm very familiar with it. And it doesn't have that same magic that book 1 did, where I'm entering into the world and seeing Hogwarts and everything through Harry's eyes, seeing it all for the first time. And I think I wanted more of that cozy Hogwarts feel, but instead we get a book that is probably the one that's most dominated by a single kind of mystery plot. Never really loved the whole Basilisk plot with students getting paralyzed. It starts off on a wrong note for me too, where Dobby is making Harry's life absolutely miserable trying to protect him, and results in one of the most ridiculous beginnings where there's no one around on that platform 9 3/4. They just happen to be the last ones trying to get in. No one sees them. No one worries about where they are. Man, I despise that beginning. I miss out on a nice cozy ride on the Hogwarts Express. We don't get too many of those. And yeah, it was okay, but definitely not the greatest, most thrilling sequel. And it wasn't really until book 3 that I thought the sequels really started to kick the series into high gear, where I was really captivated. So, another book 2 from a favorite series. This is Full Moon by Jim Butcher, book 2 of the Dresden Files. So a lot of people have this as their lowest ranked Dresden book, so this is not a hot take, but I was engaged by Stormfront. I liked it a lot, and then this one was just okay. It's really dominated by this werewolf plot. I'm not the biggest werewolf fan, and there's different kinds of werewolves, and I just wasn't caring that much. It has some of the weakest antagonists in the series, and also the one in the series I've read the least, because I've reread the whole series, but kind of just skipped this one after I started it, and was like, yeah, I'm not too into this. So Butcher wrote this when he was fairly young, and early on in his writing career, and things just get so much better in the next book and the following books after that. So yeah, very just meh kind of book. Sticking on the theme of book 2's for my favorite series, this is Well of Ascension, book 2 of the original Mistborn trilogy. So I was captivated by book 1, Mistborn, The Final Empire. It was the book that brought me into reading adult fantasy about 5 years ago. And I loved the setting, the magic, and the plot really was a full, complete plot that could have had it as a standalone, and I would have been pretty satisfied. And so this is almost like a series reset, almost like doing what book 1's do, and it kind of had a slower pace to it. I didn't love the city politics stuff, and it ended up not being too impactful, I think, for the whole series. And Zane is a major character, providing conflict for Vin. Not the biggest fan of that whole plot either. And so I like this. I really love the climactic sequence and how it ends and sets things up for the final book, but was a clear step down for me from the absolutely spectacular book 1. I'll stay within the Mistborn world for my next one, which is Shadows of Self, book 2 of the Mistborn Era 2. And this is a hot take. I know a lot of people really like this book, but I really loved Alloy of Law. And this whole series is a weird kind of thing in Sanderson's career, because he wrote Alloy of Law as kind of a break from the longer, heavier stuff he had been working on. He had written it as a fun standalone, and it is so fast-paced. I loved the developments we get with the magic system and how it interacts in this more modern world. And then after Alloy of Law, Sanderson realized he wanted to stick with this era, stick with those characters, and write a whole series with them. And that's when he planned out a kind of whole trilogy to follow up Alloy of Law. That's why the series is 4 books. And so Shadows of Self is kind of like a reset, kind of like a book 1, and it has a slower pace. I also don't love the main plot arc of this. It is very dark, and it's always been maybe my single least favorite main plot arc of any single Cosmere book. And when I've reread it, it's kind of been a drag for me, and knowing what's coming. Has a good plot twist, but yeah, just not the biggest fan of this book, and probably my single least favorite Cosmere book overall. So feel free to disagree with me in the comments about that one. All right, the next one is book 2 in the Draenei Saga, at least by publication order, and this is The King Beyond the Gate by David Gemmell. So this is the closest thing we have to a sequel to Legend, David Gemmell's first book. It is the next book that comes in the chronology of the world, but it's, I think, 100 or more years after that, so it's a few generations after. There aren't any character crossovers, and this really frustrates me because I've heard David Gemmell speak about what happened with his publisher. Legend was a big success for Gemmell and the publisher, and the publisher is pulling some Hollywood studio shenanigans by telling him, ooh, Legend sold, so give me another Legend. And they actually forced him to put the book he was working on in the trunk. He was working on a Druss prequel. Druss was the great older character from Legend, and he was working on a Druss prequel, and they forced him to write a rehashing of Legend. And I hate that the publisher got involved like that. This book, I still liked it. I gave it 3 stars. It had its impactful moments, and Gemmell's writing definitely is on the faster pace side. I like that, but it just did everything Legend was doing, but not as good. The protagonists were not as memorable as Druss. The big battle set pieces were not as memorable as the ones in Legend. And this one, I would definitely not recommend reading right after Legend like I did. I'd go back to the prequel sub-series or Druss novels and give some breathing room between Legend and this one to enjoy this more and let it stand on its own. But yeah, not a great follow-up to Legend. Here's another one from my childhood. This is book 2 of the Inheritance Saga by Christopher Paolini. It's eldest. I did enjoy Aragon, book 1. I was a big Harry Potter fan. I wanted to branch out, try other series. I was liking Aragon, even though I was a big Star Wars fan, and I could tell that Paolini was ripping a lot of things right out of Star Wars. But it was a new setting and very different from Star Wars too, so I was game. But then I got maybe halfway through this one, and I was really bored by it. I was pretty ruthless when I was younger about DNFing, and so I DNF'd, and I tried coming back to it a couple years later, and the same thing happened. At some point, I just finding myself too bored to keep going, and I never have gotten through this. So, yeah, I just was really not as engaged as I was reading Aragon for some reason. It's been so many years, I can't really remember why at this point, but not the sequel I think I was hoping for. The next book 2 that felt like a step down from book 1 is Soulsmith by Will White. That's book 2 of the Cradle series. So book 1 and 2 are often people's least favorites, and I don't think it's a hot take because I think Soulsmith is often people's least favorite. But I was fairly engaged by the beginning of the series and just sent on a pretty wild ride. And then book 2, just the narrative ground to a halt as we're in this kind of backwoods area with these clan politics going on that I didn't really latch on to. The core character dynamics between Lyndon and Yeren just were not really developing much. Didn't give me much to get invested in on the character front. There was a lot of magic system things going on, and I just didn't understand the magic well enough at this point. It wasn't being explained well enough for me to really understand what was happening a lot of the time in this one. And so this one was getting so unengaging that I was on the point of DNFing the series, but I was doing it mostly by audio with Travis Baldry's narration, and his audio was so engaging and fun that I stuck with it. And the books are short in the beginning of the series, so I did end up getting much more engaged later on. But man, I wish he could have gotten some more character development and more plot movement in some of these early books. Speaking of book 2s that grind the narrative to a halt, I have to discuss The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. That's book 2 of the Broken Earth trilogy. So I was fairly captivated by book one, the fifth season. The setting was really fresh and interesting. The characters were very compelling, and the hints about the lore and the history were intriguing to me. And a lot happened in book one, too. And then book two, just everything comes to a standstill with this long side quest feeling plot in a new community where just Jemison did not develop these new characters very well. There's a lot of new characters that weren't very distinctive. They didn't stand out in any way. There weren't as many interesting plot events happening, and everything just got less and less engaging and kind of just deadened my enthusiasm for the series. And it eventually picked back up in book three, but I feel like this could have been a spectacular duology if it was condensed and a bit tighter. Because, yeah, not a lot happened in book two that's standing out to me. I didn't read it too long ago, and I remember very little from it, which is never a good sign. Next one was a bit of a similar experience, and maybe a bit of a hot take. That is The Dragon Republic, the second book in the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. So my favorite book in this trilogy was book one. I enjoyed the school setting. I was compelled by Rin, and the ending really was spectacular for me. And I almost wish that could have been a standalone and just left on that really cool note. But here in book two, Kuang did some things with the protagonist. I don't want to really say what they were, but they made the protagonist put them in a very passive position for a lot of the book, and a pretty miserable position. And it was a drag to read. It was not very fun. The plotting around the war situation did not really engage me. It felt very predictable. The battle scenes, I thought, were some of the weakest I've ever read, not very well described. The expansion we got with the magic system just didn't feel very interesting, and some of the explanations we got of how the magic worked were then broken soon after they were introduced. And the thing that held this series back for me maybe most of all was that I thought the book one was really heavily focused around Rin as the primary driver of the story, whereas book two and then in book three, the side characters take on a more prominent place. And I thought these side characters were just absolute cardboard cutouts, very two-dimensional, not given much depth, just one-note personalities and plot devices. And yeah, did not love the plotting, and where this took the series for book three really also deadened my enthusiasm for the whole series. This takes me to the last one that I want to discuss, which is my single least favorite book on here. That is The Return of the Crimson Guard by Ian C. Esselmont, book two in the Novels of the Malazan Empire series. So when I was reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, I wanted to intersperse in Esselmont's books where they happened in the chronology. And I had great success with this with Knight of Knives, the first one in the series. It was a slimmer volume. It was a real cool, interesting, fun change-up from the pacing of Steven Eriksson's bigger books. It was focused on just a couple POV characters, all in one location, happening pretty much over one night. And the style felt different. It was so engaging for me. And I thought, oh, what a great switch up that's bringing new life to me as I'm going through this really heavy, the bigger tomes in the Book of the Fallen. And then I get to Return of the Crimson Guard, and unfortunately, this was not a change of pace. It actually slowed things down from the usual pace I was used to. This is a 1,000-page chunker, and this felt to me like Esselmont trying his own hand at writing like Eriksson, with a lot of POVs and POV hopping, with a more epic scope, with switching around the locations on different continents, and a huge convergence plot. And the beginning of this book felt really amateurish. Just, we didn't get to know any of the POV characters well enough, and you didn't have that same touch that Eriksson does, where you can feel like these 3D characters just jump off the page, right when you meet them, with some of their lines of dialogue, just a little bit of description or time spent with them. Here I was spending pages and pages of POV characters, and they felt very indistinct. And then we would hop away from them just as I was feeling like I was starting to get some momentum and getting to know them. And there were probably a few POVs here that could have easily just been cut out. They felt redundant. Their plots weren't even that important for the arc of the book or the series on the whole. And oh man, I really was bored and felt like I just was so unengaged for the first half of this. I am glad I kept going because I put in my time on the first half, because the climactic sequence and the convergence that happens does have payoffs, and it was important for the overall Malazan series. And so I'm glad that I pushed through, but I thought Esselmont just missed his opportunity in this series to differentiate himself from Erikson by writing those slimmer, more focused books that I felt like were more of his strength. And then I ended up loving Orb Scepter Throne, which is a return to that more focused, faster paced style of Esselmont's. And I also did not love the chunkier ones at the end of this series either. So this Crimson Guard arc ended up being a huge dud for me. Just felt very anticlimactic in a lot of ways. But yeah, I would highly recommend, if you want to try Esselmont, to maybe start with his other series, the Path to Ascendancy series. Those are slimmer. They are the more focused variety. I'm very excited to try those because I think that's playing to Esselmont's strengths as a writer. But this one, a massive fail and a bore for me. Alright, those are 10 book 2s that I felt like stepped it down from book 1. Feel free to let me know how wrong I am about some of these in the comments. Have some fun with it. And yeah, I'll catch you later.